We as humans, we get these little tiny moments, these thoughts of inspiration, and sometimes they come out of nowhere. And too often, and I'm guilty just like anybody, we dismiss them. We're, too busy, or I don't know how to do that, or someone else is doing that, or I don't have time, or whatever. None of that matters. If you take some time to follow those tiny moments, now you might not end up building the largest bed building charity in the world. That's not what it's about. It's about satisfying and giving yourself the opportunity to maybe finding a passion you didn't know existed.
Children sleeping on floors, families without a single bed of their own. It's called bedlessness. And Luke Mickelson didn't discover it through a strategic plan or a 5-year vision document. He noticed it in a small, teachable moment, an echo most of us would have missed. What followed wasn't a broad campaign to end poverty. It was something far more focused. One problem, one actionable solution: build beds. And that laser focus is what unlocks scale. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers, communities mobilized across states and countries. If you're a nonprofit leader, a volunteer, or someone who cares enough to give, this episode isn't just about beds. It's about what happens when you resist the temptation to solve everything and instead focus on solving one thing exceptionally well. Let's begin. Luke Mickelson, what an honor and pleasure to have you on. You are what you give. Thank you for giving of your time to make this conversation happen.
Well, Avi, thanks for having me on. This is great. I mean, I love sharing not just my story, but the story of Sleep at Emily Peace with everybody, and now including your audience. So thanks.
Well, I'm sure everyone's going to love this story. I love the story. To me, it's far more than a story. These are amazing people who are involved in your project. But first, tell us, what is bedlessness and how did you get involved in this?
It's a great question. Bedlessness actually is not even a real word, but it's a real problem, which was a kind of phrase coined by the awesome Mike Rowe. First of all, a little bit about me. I'm a farm kid from Idaho. That's about the best I can tell you about me. I grew up in a small town, and living and growing up in a small town, I always tell people the benefits is everybody, and the downside is everybody.
There you go.
But really, the beauty of it is, because everybody, you almost instantly develop this bond and care for people, and because you live so close. And I grew up in a small, pretty humble home with a single mom and 4 other siblings, and so we didn't have a lot. And my community meant a lot to me. They helped us in times that we needed. They would comfort us. They supported us. My mom worked at the schools. And growing up in such a small town, if you could pick up any sort of a ball and throw it in the right direction with any sort of accuracy, you're going to play some sports. And sports brings a lot of teaching and joy that comes from camaraderie with teammates and competition and overcoming, adversity, all those things that sports provides. And as I grew older and got married, and I eventually moved back to the same small town because I'd moved away for a little while, and I was grateful. I always wanted my kids to have the same, childhood experience in those small town feel as I did, because I loved the joy that comes from having community and feeling close to your community. I always had a very entrepreneurial heart. I've started and sold and closed many businesses in my life, and I think that all played a very big role in the start of Sleep at Heavenly Peace and the solution to what we now call child bedlessness, because starting and running a nonprofit is really no different than running a business. And there's a lot of, there's some differences, but for the most part, it's very similar. And there's a lot of pitfalls that some nonprofits fall into, thinking that you operate it differently than a business.
That's a critical piece. I want to make sure we double click on that. There's some of the folks who are in our audience who are giving to nonprofits, other people who are running the nonprofits, and there's this kind of mode of thinking or operation where oftentimes in the nonprofit, people are thinking, I'm getting up in the morning, and because I'm nonprofit, so I don't have to make any money, so I can just do stuff that matters. And it's fun to do stuff, but are we measuring the outcomes? And I think one of the challenges there is that, yes, you better know what your bottom line is, and your bottom line is often more difficult to define than it is in the business. Because in the business, when it's money, that's pretty easy. But
Yeah.
what's the currency of your nonprofit? So how, give me an example, if you will. The business world, the nonprofit world, what have you been able to draw from business to make the nonprofit more successful?
Great question. And it's good we started out this way because I think it lays a foundation of how Sleep and Heavily Peace grew from my garage to now the world's largest bed building charity. My first recommendation to anybody is go listen to Dan Pilotti's TED Talk. So Dan Pilotti, I don't even really know much about him. I know he was very influential in a lot of large nonprofits, but he gave the greatest nonprofit TED Talk. And the name of it always escapes me. That's something like the misconceptions of what nonprofits are, right? Something like that. But
I
basically,
think you might have two TED Talks out, but the one that's most popular, I think it's Dan Pilata, and he indeed is inspirational. It's like everyone who's ever run a nonprofit has seen that, but everyone who hasn't run a nonprofit hasn't seen it yet.
yeah,
So if you haven't run a nonprofit, it's also worth seeing the same TED
know,
Talk. Tell us about it.
he goes,
Tell us about it, Luke.
yeah, and he goes into it. And and if you're looking to start a nonprofit or even run a nonprofit and some of this conversation is interesting, go to and listen to that TED Talk because a lot of big pearls come from him. And so back to your question, I didn't know any other way. I mean, I never ran a nonprofit when Sleep and Heavily Peace landed in my lap. I didn't know what running a nonprofit was. I knew what running a business was. And so that's how I set it up. Whether it was dumb luck or not, that's just how I set it up. But what people need to realize is, a nonprofit, like a for-profit company, you have expenses, you have overhead, you have rainy day funds, you have margins that you need to hold. Too often, and I actually run another company called Humans Helping Humans, where I do nonprofit consulting, because I've been down the pit holes before, and I've pulled myself out and learned a lot of things. But you still have the same battles that for-profits have, and in some ways, you even have worse battles. Because in the nonprofit sector, you quote quote shouldn't make money, and quote quote you can't pay yourself an accurate wage like a for-profit company is. And these are all misnomers that really handicap the nonprofit world and the growth of nonprofits, right? And so, going into starting a nonprofit, you instantly have to look at it as a business, right? Too many nonprofits I speak to, it's $100 come in and they want to make sure $100 goes out. They feel like obligated to do that. And although that's very chivalrous, that's the right word for it, very honorable that you do that, don't plan on growing because you won't, And
There you go. That's a critical piece. It's almost as though, Dan Pilata gives that example of the bake sale, right? If you're running a nonprofit that's going to run on bake sales, then it's fine. You can make $70 and you'll be just fine with all the volunteers. But if you're running for scale, and here, this is not an endorsement or lack thereof of Dan, but the point is, if you're running for scale, then you need to be thinking business-wise, you need to be thinking bigger. And how big is your vision? So with that, Luke, I want to jump in to your vision and this idea of childhood bedlessness, whether it's a word or not, it's been coined. Let's call it a word, and it's
Sure.
good enough for us. What is the problem? How did you said it fell into your lap. Sounds to me like probably a little more entrepreneurial spirit than things just falling in your lap. But
Sure.
but how did you identify the problem? And then how did you come up with that solution?
So in 2012, that's when this all started. In my small town, I served in my church as well, a position called the Young Men's President. So I coached football and coached, worked with the youth in activities my whole life. And so when I got called into this position, I loved it because I loved working with the boys, right? It was ages 12 to 17, and I was responsible for the spiritual growth, but also the activity of the church, of the boys, which was basically Boy Scouts, right? I was the leader of the Boy Scouts. Well, in this role, I'd meet every other week with other auxiliary leaders in the church, and we'd talk about events that are happening both in the community, also in the congregation, and then we'd talk about people that we were helping. Well, this is a small town, and I rode my bike my whole life around this entire town. I thought I knew every inch of it. Well, we started talking about this family, and it caught my ear because they mentioned how they lived in an apartment complex I didn't even know existed. That's how remote this was, right? And
Mhm.
wait a minute, where is this place? So my ears were already perked. But then one of the leaders talked about how they visited the house, and as they walked through the house to see what their needs were, just in passing, she mentioned, yeah, and the kids don't have any beds and they need this. And I was like, wait a minute. It just hit me like a 2x4. I said, wait
Mhm.
a minute. Did you just say they don't have any beds? I mean, surely they got at least an air mattress or something like that. And she said, no, I saw blankets on concrete floor. That was it.
Wow.
And I instantly thought of my own kids, right? You know, I've got a couple of kids, and I thought, man, gosh, I remember sleeping on the floor once in my entire life when I didn't want to, and it was the worst night's sleep. So to think of a
Imagine
kid,
that.
yeah, I think of a kid day in and day out. It was
Wow.
rough to think about. And then the thought came to me, you know, all you leaders out there that work with teenage boys, finding an activity that doesn't require or include a TV screen or a computer game, right, is tough to do nowadays. And I instantly thought, oh, great, here is a good opportunity that I can get an Xbox controller out of these boys' hands and put a drill and a sander in it, and we'll build a bed. You know, we'll teach them
Mhm.
something. Now, I'd never built furniture before in my life, but I mean, I wasn't a stranger to tools, but I wasn't afraid of the challenge either. And I got really excited. I went home that night after that meeting and started measuring my daughter's bunk bed. She had one, and kind of came up with a design close to it, you know, but a very simple design because
Mhm.
dealing with teenage boys,
Right, be careful.
got to make it simple. And that week they came over and we built a bunk bed for this family. Now, I was really excited to notice how excited the boys were. Both, I think the activity was fun. I mean, who doesn't like playing with power tools, right?
Of
Uh,
course.
but also the cause that it was going to, I think, was what did they didn't miss that, right?
Was that boy that they were building the bed for, was he one of their peers or just someone else in the group?
Great
Or was
question.
he not in the group?
He was not. Well, it was actually a boy and a girl. It was two kids. Then they were much younger. I mean, I'm trying to remember. They were 6 or 7, something like that.
So they were
Got
part of the
pictures.
church community, but it's not like they knew that someone, in the church was building a bed for them, or did they?
No, no idea, no idea. And that was kind of the fun part of it. You know, we first talked about buying a bed for them. You know, I wanted the kids to kind of think about it. I was gonna lead them towards building it anyways, but as they came up with the concept, they really kind of finally agreed that, you know what, building a bed would be fun.
I think many people who are less entrepreneurial than you would have thought, how do we raise money for a bed? Or how do we find someone who's throwing out a bed, that's
Mhm.
still functional, and we get another bed? Like, who thinks, oh, let's build one, right? That's, like you said, maybe a little tools here and the fact that the boys thought about it themselves, you would have taken them there, but they got it there anyway. To what
Mhm.
do you attribute that?
Oh, I think you know, I let them a little bit, but I think when people really take time to think about a child sleeping on the floor, right? Especially when you can like paint that picture for them and paint what the causes and the effects of that for a child would be. It's not a hard sell. You know, it's not a hard concept to get behind and want to solve. And we see that in Sleep and Emily Peace nowadays. I mean, raising money at for a chapter president in Sleep and Emily Peace is like the easiest thing for people to do because all you have to do is say we build beds for kids, and that was the fun part is giving them an assignment. Now, keep in mind, I didn't even know what the assignments were per se. I'd never built it before, and I didn't want them to use the saw because that was keep their fingers, but there was a lot to do. I mean, there was drilling holes and figuring out together. I mean, I remember sitting there going, so what do you think? Do you think we should do it right here? You know, I wanted them to think about it. And so it was a really good teaching opportunity. So when we finished building the bed, something unique happened. the boys obviously through the couple of days had shared it with their families, and then their family shared it with other families. All of a sudden, there was like 30 people that wanted to show up to deliver this bed. The word kind of got out that we were doing this, and everybody loved it. They wanted to be a part of it, which put me in kind of a little bit of a predicament. I couldn't show up at this small, 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment with 30 people. So me and a couple of leaders stayed back and cleaned my garage because it was a mess. And the boys and their parents and a few other leaders went and delivered this bed. So I missed out on it. Now, the next day
Oh,
at
wow.
church, they told me how amazing it was. I mean, you can imagine these kids were just ecstatic. The parents were very excited about it, and I was happy for the boys, but I also felt very jealous because I missed out on the prize, if you will, which really played a role into the second thing that happened. And if I back up just a little bit, there's a few things going on in my life personally that really affected this and the reasons why I went down there. I was going through kind of, I don't know, some people call it a midlife crisis. For me, I was going through a little bit of an identity crisis, like a purpose crisis. I didn't feel like I was fulfilling who I really could be. I wasn't making a difference like I wanted to in the world. I was going through a major faith crisis. I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. And all of these things were going through my head, and they weighed very heavily on my heart and had been for several years.
Luke,
Well,
can I ask you roughly what age are we talking about?
I was 35-ish,
Mhm.
I had gone through the last couple of years or couple of years before that, but 35 is about when all this started. And so here I was, just finished this awesome experience with these boys, sitting on the couch, and life comes back. You get right back into the rut of it. And I knew that was coming. I could feel it coming. I didn't want to. It almost made it worse because, this project that I did filled my heart. It was just exactly what I needed. And now it was going away because I didn't know any other kids that needed beds.
Well, Luke, I'd like to think that after a bunk bed for 2 kids, you've solved bedlessness for the community and you're done.
It's exactly right. It's exactly.
I wish that were the case.
Well, the funny thing is, so I'm sitting on my couch, and my kids and I were watching Big Bang Theory back in the day. We loved it, right? And a commercial came on. It was about Christmas time. It was the first week of December, and it was some Xbox game or something like that. My kids were begging me to buy this game for Christmas. They wanted it for Christmas present. I don't know. It just hit me. I'm going through this turmoil in my own soul. I just experienced this great thing that I missed out on it in a way that I didn't get to deliver. And now my kids want an Xbox because I'm not going to buy them. And they've got a bed when there's kids out there I just realized didn't have a bed. I mean, it just, all these things hit me at once. It was like the perfect storm. I remember I didn't say anything. Sorry.
It's good.
It's hitting me. I needed to do something, even for me, but I also wanted it for my kids. I remember thinking, Avi, that I could teach my kids, I could talk to them, I could show them videos and pictures all day long of what service looks like, but there's nothing like actually doing it. And so I got off the couch, started walking to the garage, and my kids are like, "Dad, where are you going? The program's on." And I said, I've got leftover wood. I'm going to build another bunk bed, and you're going to come and help me. And we had such a great time. The last, couple of days, me and my kids, my daughter, who was, I think, 6 at the time, and her little pink tutu was out there drilling holes in the wood. And my son was hammering away. We just had a great time. And it wasn't to solve child bedlessness. You're right. I had no idea that there was even another family out there. I just wanted my kids to feel the joy of service, the joy of selflessness, and to appreciate the things they had. And so my wife at the time said, well, why don't you just put it on Facebook? One of those buy, sell, trade groups. And so I did that, right? I reluctantly did it. I was a little worried about putting a free bed on buy, sell, trade, right? But a couple of things happened that just blew me away. First thing happened was a lot of people I had no idea who they were, and old friends I hadn't talked to in 20 years, send me messages about kids that they knew that were sleeping on the floor, families that had
Wow.
kids on the floor, and not just the floor. We're talking pallets and, couch cushions and, 3 or 4 kids to one queen bed. I mean, these conditions just blew me away. That was one problem. And the second problem was there was a lot of them. It wasn't just onesie twosies. There was a family of 8, 2 parents, 6 kids. They'd been sleeping in a van, in an 8-passenger van. I mean, I didn't realize this was going on in my own community. And it's not a poor community, it's a fairly wealthy area. And so it was really shocking to me. And so I wanted this bed that me and my kids built. I wanted it to go to a special family. It was a special bed for us. Clearly, I had some selections to go from here.
Wow.
I had a friend of mine call me up. I knew her for many years. Actually, we served a mission together for our church. And she says, Luke, let me tell you about Haley and Haley's family. So Haley is a 6-year-old girl that had never slept on a bed. She slept in the backseat of her mom's car. That was it. My friend had just helped them get a house. And so I said, this is perfect, right? I trusted my friend. It sounded like a great opportunity for my kids and a great opportunity for this special bed that we built. So we headed out to go deliver this bed. Well, when I walked in the house, you can imagine, granted, they just got this house, but there wasn't anything in it. There was no couch or table. There was nothing. There was a hot plate with a can of soup on it. That was really the only thing in the house. But this little girl was so excited. I'd never seen homelessness. I'd seen it before, but I'd never seen it through the eyes of a 6-year-old. And I was moderately surprised that this girl was so excited, and even more excited to show me her bedroom. She, show me where you sleep. So she pulled us back in her bedroom, and you can imagine what it looks like. I mean, it was holes in the carpet and tears in the wallpaper. The closet door was gone, right? It just was. And it was one of those houses, but they had a house. She had a bedroom for the first time ever. And of all of those things, that was the most disturbing, I should say the most disturbing thing was the pile of clothes in the corner. I quickly realized that was Haley's bed. She would come home from school, put her PJs on, sleep on her school clothes, and then put them back on in the morning to go to school. And this is what Haley knew, And I remember my first reaction was almost anger. I was like upset. This is going on in my own hometown. Are you kidding me? This poor little girl is sleeping these. I mean, you almost get upset about it. And then, I felt a lot of emotion, but then I got really excited because we were starting to bring in this bed for her. And you could watch her kind of try to figure out what we were doing. Then all of a sudden, once she realized it was a bed,
It clicked.
oh, it clicked. And I'd never seen a child erupt like she did. She got so excited. I mean, this girl, never met her before. She's hugging me and hugging my friend and, super excited that these 2 strangers are bringing her a bed. She even hugged and kissed the bed. I'd never seen it before. A child cherish a bed so much. And if that wasn't enough, Avi, to just melt your heart, right? You look up at mom, and here's a single mom. And I was raised by a single mom too. 6
It's
years.
the mom and Haley. It's the 2 of them.
It's the 2 of them. There was another daughter. I never met her because it was a bunk bed. I think she was passed back and forth between a dad or something. I'm not sure the situation, but I looked at this mom, and 6 years of tears are just running down her face, and I knew what each one of those tears meant. I saw it in my own mom, right? And so it really hit me hard. I knew right then and there, this is way more than just a bed. This is bringing families together. This is relieving stress for a mom who may have left a really bad situation. A lot of times we deliver to single moms who had 5 minutes to pack up their house and leave in a situation that was unwanted, if you will. And, and then there's little Haley here. Like a lot of these kids we deliver beds to, they're in these situations not because of their choices, it's because of other people, right?
It's never the kids. The kids are that's the deal that they got.
That's right. And so that all of this was just falling on top of us. All these emotions just was falling on me. And I remember thinking, look, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I love sports. I love hunting and fishing and college football and all these things that consume my time. And like that, I mean, in instant, those things that I cared for 35 years didn't mean much anymore to me. It literally, I remember I spent couple of hours each night that week building a bed to solve that problem, yeah, that's well worth my time. And from then on,
Ex-
I looked over to my friend Jordan. We were driving home. We didn't say much to each other because we were so overwhelmed. I remember looking at him. I said, Jordan, no kid's going to sleep on the floor in my town if I have anything to do with it. What I didn't realize was how big no kid sleeps on the floor in our town really was, and
Well,
we started.
that's frightening, Luke. But before we get to the frightening, can I just first of all rewind for a second? Because you mentioned that at that point in life, you were in a purpose crisis,
Right.
figuring out what was next. When this bed, this new first time bed for Haley came together and clicked for her and she realized what it was, your reaction was emotional. But at that point, were you getting that sense of purpose, or was it just, I need to do a certain number of tasks? Is this where you want your life to be going? Or is this where it's kind of like a project for you?
Great question. I've never been asked that question. The honest truth is, I think, I think subconsciously, it was my purpose. I had found my passion. Now, I didn't know it at the time. All I knew was the emotions I felt and what it wanted me, what it drove me to do. That when we got home, I was serious. I was like upset. No kid is going to sleep on the floor in my town. I'm going to do whatever I got. I had a list of kids from my post. Those were the first ones I was going to take care of. So we started building beds, and we built 21 that first year, and the more I built, and the more we shared, the deliveries and what we were doing, the more applications, quote, quote, applications, kids we found were coming in. And that's when I think, I'd like to say that's when I, subconsciously came to my consciousness was like, oh, this is a problem. I'm going to solve it,
So,
and
Luke, you weren't looking for this. You
no,
were
no,
looking for purpose, but you weren't looking for this. That's what
correct.
you mean when you said that it fell into your lap.
Correct. I do a lot of public speaking about tiny moments because of this experience I had. We as humans, we get these little tiny moments, these thoughts of inspiration, and sometimes they come out of nowhere. And too often, and I'm guilty just like anybody, we dismiss them. We're, too busy, or I don't know how to do that, or someone else is doing that, or I don't have time, or whatever. I don't know how to do that. And really, that none of that matters. If you take some time to follow those tiny moments, now you might not end up building the largest bed building charity in the world. That's not what it's about. It's about satisfying and giving yourself the opportunity to maybe finding a passion you didn't know existed. I mean, if you told me 15 years ago I'd be building beds as a legacy for kids, I'd have laughed because A, is that even a problem? And B, I've never built furniture in my life, and
But Luke, what you're saying is fascinating because you're saying there's a tiny moment. At that tiny moment, you're choosing not to scroll past what's come into your field of view, and that field of view is something that came from the outside. It's not you being involved in yourself. It's specifically you looking beyond yourself. And yet, while you're looking beyond yourself, you're finding out who you are.
correct. And the funny thing is, the tiny moment, Avi, wasn't let's go help kids. That will not help kids with beds. The tiny moment was I want to help my own kids. I want to teach my own kids. Remember, I didn't know that this was an issue. So the tiny moment, yeah, I got up to teach my kids something. And that tiny moment, hence, was satisfied. Let's call it satisfied. But it was the byproduct of a tiny moment. It was a byproduct of me getting my butt off the couch and actually doing something about something, right? And that's when it spawned and opened up the door of child bedlessness and sleep and only peace to me. And that's why it's so critical. I just encourage everybody, follow those tiny moments. I promise you, they're only going to do good. And you know what? You might not know the result of it other than it might not even help the person you went to go do. I think it will, but it's going to help yourself. And those are the things I didn't realize it was doing for me, as much as it was doing for me, at the time. And now I can look back and go, my life has completely changed, all for the good, because I acted on that tiny moment.
So Luke, you acted on a tiny moment, as I understand, because you cared enough to care. There was something that was bothering you, and again, bothering you can just seep in deeper into the couch and watch the program, or get off the couch and do something about it. Again,
Correct.
not knowing where it's going to go. That sort of open field running. Let me just do something, which is obviously led you onto a life path. But I also think there's something really interesting about all these people who are responding to you on Facebook. It's your friend who knew about Haley and took the time to care enough to respond to the Facebook post. And all those other people and all those applicants, it sounds to me that it's not, maybe there are some cases where people were asking for themselves, but there's also other people in this system who are referring people. They cared enough to pay attention and say, well, there's really somebody else who can use this.
You know what's funny, Audie, is I learned this with that post, and obviously later on, I learned that child bedlessness is a real thing, and it's massive. It's way more than I thought ever existed. And the second thing I learned is there are tons of people out there that care. There's tons of people that want to give back. They just don't know how, right? I mean, these people I hadn't talked to maybe ever or hadn't talked to for a long time. They didn't call me up or send me a message to say, "Hi, Luke, how you doing?" They called me because they wanted to make a difference in someone else's lives. That's a sign of good people wanting to do something. Maybe they just don't know how. And I've seen that time and time again in Sleep in Heavenly Peace. And that's a huge part of the growth of Sleep in Heavenly Peace is providing meaningful and fulfilling service for volunteers that are looking for that. You know, people
Well,
that are
let's
looking
talk
for that.
about that, Luke. Let's talk about that because I saw some videos on the Sleep in Heavenly Peace website,
Mhm.
and what grabbed me was the stories of the volunteers themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Let me tell you my Hank story. So this is a little later on. This is about 3 years after we started it. We were building every year. Once a year, we were having this build day event, right? And I remember I just got a rundown warehouse, and I wanted to put it this build day. I wanted to open it up to everybody, right? And it was the first time I actually sent like a newspaper press release out there saying, "Hey, I've got a build coming up on Saturday. If you want to build beds for kids, come on down to this location." Now, keep in mind, this is January of December in Idaho in a warehouse that doesn't have heat. I didn't expect much, to be honest with you. I was hoping, and we got a lot of people. It was great. But I remember one specifically, in walked this guy named Hank. Now, Hank was about 500 years old. I mean, he was an old dude, but he had this grandpa smile. I mean, you look at him and he'd smile, and oh my gosh, he was your grandpa. I mean, instantly. And he did something very unique, Avi. He had these little thank you cards. It said, like, "Thank you for your service," or something, as I recall. And he was handing them out to these other volunteers. We hadn't even started yet. And he was thanking them for showing up. And I remember thinking, oh, this is not this guy's first rodeo, right? He's done this before. Well, he finally came over to me. He says, "Okay, Luke, where do you need me?" And my first thought was, well, I don't need you to die. Okay. Just
Stay alive.
it isn't exactly easy, right? It's not it's pretty physically demanding. You know, you're moving wood around and stuff like. I said, "Well, tell me, Hank, what did you do for a living?" He says, "Well, I was a carpenter for 40 years." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I know exactly where to put you, brother. If there's one station of our assembly line that you can't screw up, it's the cutting of the wood." So I put him on the saw, and it's the most dangerous that we have. So it's got to have an experienced person. Well,
Experience for sure.
well, you got to remember, like, this is a first public build. Everybody there has never done this before but me. And so for 4 hours, I'm running around helping 40, 50 other people with their stations of how to do it and solve problems. Well, I forgot about Hank. I forgot about this guy in the back of the warehouse cutting wood. Well, the build was almost over. It was like 3 or 4 hours later. And I realized, oh my gosh, is Hank alive? I go run back there and I said, "Hank, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about you. How you doing?" And, he was covered, eyelashes full of sawdust. His clothes were as white as his hair. And I remember he looked at me and he says, "Luke, let me tell you something. Hey, I have volunteered at a lot of things before, but I have never showed up to an event, and in 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, I was put on, an assignment. I was given an assignment, and I couldn't leave that assignment. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't leave it for 4 hours. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm so sorry. Hey, I really felt bad. And I said, yeah, Hank, I'm sorry, man. He's like, no, no, no. He said, thank you. And right then, Avi, I learned a very valuable lesson. I learned that, you know what? The happiest volunteers are the sweatiest and the dustiest. Because when you want to take time to volunteer, especially on a Saturday, on a cold Saturday, you got better things to do. If you want, as a volunteer, if you want to donate your time, you want to feel like you did something. You want to feel like your efforts meant something. And the more you feel like that, the more fulfilled you walk away from, with rather. And that's important. That volunteer experience is so critical to nonprofits. And I was, like many nonprofits, I was trying to make this process as easy as I could because I wanted these volunteers to come back and I didn't want them to overwork them and all this stuff. And it was quite the opposite. These people want to show up. They want to feel like they did something. The only way that they're going to feel that way is if they actually worked hard, right? They were sore. And I learned that from Hank. Volunteers that want to feel fulfilled, when they come to SHP and build beds, most of the time, I hear all the time, that was the funnest service activity I've ever done. Not the easiest, right? And I think that's the point.
Yep, for sure. It's a message for, as you said, the nonprofits, and it's a message for the volunteers, right? I actually don't think that the volunteers have had anything better to do other than volunteering, but that's because I believe in volunteering. I think the most rewarding day, that if they would have sat home and again, watched TV, they would not have felt any sense of reward. Yeah. They would have maybe had a relaxing day, but we want to be purposeful. We want to do things that are going to matter. They're going to move the needle. And this solving of bedlessness is just a fascinating way to do it. It's not only fascinating, it's going to just drive people to do something that's meaningful, like Hank, who couldn't leave the machine. But now my question to you, Luke, is you mentioned chapters. How big is Sleep in Heavenly Peace today?
So what I found, the more we built beds, the more people wanted to build beds, and the more we delivered beds, the more people found out and started to apply, or they knew of kids that were sleeping on the floor, so they would apply for those kids. The greater the need was exposed. Well, then we found out, or we got contacted by friends and family that, hey, we live 2 states over. Can you come and do this over here? And I'm like, well, tell you what, why don't you just do it? I'll teach you how to do it. We'll set you up as, a chapter of this charity, and you can do it in your own hometown. Well, that just started to grow. And in the end of 2017, we had grown to 5 states. Wow. And we had about 7 active chapters at the time, most of which were friends and families. We had a couple of people that just found us on the internet, loved what we were doing, wanted to build a couple of beds, and I talked them into start a chapter. And so, but at the end of 2017, something happened. Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs Mike Rowe guy, he was hosting a Facebook watch series called Returning the Favor. And what he would do, he'd go around the country and he would highlight nonprofits and the people that run them. And then he would surprise them by showing up. I mean, there's Mike Rowe. And then he would gift them something. Sometimes it was donations. Sometimes it was a car. In our case, it was a warehouse. We needed a warehouse. We didn't have a very good one. Well, that was great. But the biggest thing that Returning the Favor and Mike Rowe did for us, it was the megaphone that we needed. It was viewed by over 10 million people. Now, all of a sudden, we started getting people requesting to start chapters in their own area. And so we started adding on chapters. So that first year, so it aired in February of 2018. By the end of 2018, we had 125 chapters. So we blew up, and that kept going. Now, 2020 hit, and that kind of slowed us down a little bit with COVID. But today, we have trained over 430 chapters in 4 countries, and we have built over 370,000 beds. That
Unbelievable.
last year alone, we built almost 90,000 beds, like 89,000 beds.
Wow. That's amazing. And so how many volunteers is that roughly?
It's a great question. It's typically about 2 volunteers for every bed that we build. That's on an average, So we have about 200,000 volunteers a year. We post about 600,000 volunteer hours as an organization each year. But as you, the most staggering statistic that we have, two of them is number one, child bedlessness is greater than 3% of the total population. So that means you're in a town of 100,000 people. There's 3,000 kids right now, just right now, sleeping on the floor. And as
Wait
you
1 second. Are we talking about United States or different countries? Where's that stat?
in United States on average, and you got to understand there are no national statistics about child bedlessness because no one even knows this is real. The only statistic that is even out there, this 3%, has come from Sleep and Heavily Peace. We're no statisticians, right? But what we're able to look at the towns that we're in, the number of applicants we get, and we've come up with, at least, that's why I say it's at least on average 3%. The sad
Wow.
thing is right now, as you and I talk, there's I think it's 155 or 160,000 kids on our waiting lists right
In the
now
United States.
in the United States. I mean, a little bit in Canada, but mostly the United States. And we only cover 27% of the United States. So if you think about it, right? If we know about 3%, but we're only covering 27%, there's a good chance that 70% don't even know we exist. So we know that number is much, much higher. And quite frankly, at this point, it really doesn't matter whether it's 3% or 1% or 20%. 0% is what we're looking for, and our
Right.
mission.
Coming from the guy who said, I'm going to make sure that there's not a single child in my town
That's right.
who's sleeping on the floor. So
That's
every child really does matter. And I just think it's fascinating the entrepreneurial journey that you've gone through to make something like this happen because it's hard enough to run a local nonprofit, but you've scaled to 430 plus chapters across 4 countries. How does that work?
There's a lot of things we've learned, right? And there's a lot of things. In fact, I like I said, mentioned I run a company called Humans Helping Humans, where I do some nonprofit consulting, and there's a lot of answers to that question. For us, there were some things we did right, just luckily. There's things that we did because we're entrepreneurial and we know businesses. There was things that I was forced to do. I mean, I had a full-time job when this all started, right? I didn't have time to try to manage other things. I remember, this is a funny story. When I decided to be a nonprofit, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to run one. I mean, I knew I had to go and apply with the IRS, but after that, I didn't know what positions were held in a nonprofit. So I did what
Sounds
I
like
think
you and every other person who ever
correct.
founded a nonprofit. It's a good start.
Well, and probably like every other person, I was like, well, I guess the best way to learn this is go talk to a nonprofit. And the only nonprofit I really knew at the time in my hometown was called East End Providers. Now, I didn't really know what they did. I knew that they provided some things. They worked with the fire department. So I called up the executive director. And I said, do you mind if I come and, cheer your ear, ask you a couple of questions about some things? She says, yeah, come on down. So we showed up at this house that they got donated to use. And I walked into this house, and Avi, I tell you what, it was floor to ceiling, wall to wall stuff. I mean, it was coats and bicycles and skis and I mean, everything under the sun. It was like a garage sale. And I looked at this poor lady who looked stressed out as all get out, right? Trying to organize this, trying to work with people, trying to schedule deliveries and schedule pickups and all this. And I talked to her for about an hour, but I remember walking away. I took one thing away from that was there's no way in heck I'm going to be able to manage anything like that. Because the very first year we did this, we provided beds, but we also took donations of food and toys and all sorts of stuff for these families. Well, I walked away from that going, okay, listen, Luke, I can only manage so much. We're going to build beds, and that's all we're going to do because we want to do the best at it. So let's just focus in on one thing. What I didn't realize I was doing was actually creating the best and most important foundation of a nonprofit, and that's avoiding mission creep. Mission creep kills every nonprofit, or not every, it kills nonprofits faster than anything else. And so when I saw that, and I just established we're going to build beds, and that's all we're going to do. So that pureness, that transparency, that simpleness of a decision I didn't know at the time is the reason why Sleep in Heavenly Peace is what was and has been able to scale so fast, is because it's very simple, it's very transparent, which everybody loves in the nonprofit space. And I agree, you got to understand, and your donors and your volunteers have to clearly understand and know exactly what the mission is. And it's a story easily told, right? The minute you start adding teddy bears and, books and all these other little things, as amazing as that is, as exciting and helpful to the children as it is, the more you start diluting that mission and that message, the more risk you have of losing your nonprofit. And so
That's such a powerful message. Luke, I want that to resonate with our audience. This is somebody who's built this sprawling and constantly growing nonprofit, becoming, again, the four countries, almost all across the United States, 25% of the United States, and just seems like it keeps growing. But your potential for growth comes from your hyper focus on knowing precisely what it is that you're doing. And I think for me, that story with Haley, I would have gone into Haley's house and we said, okay, now you got a bed. Now let's see what else we can do. But what would have happened there, and we hope and pray that Haley is well today, but what would have happened there is you would have spent weeks, months helping out Haley and her family, and then there would be now hundreds of thousands of people who wouldn't have gotten beds because you were helping Haley. And so we love Haley, but your ability to grow came from your hyper focus. I think that's very powerful, Luke. Luke,
it's extremely important too, and I appreciate that because it brings about so many other things too. It's like our largest donor and partner rather, is Lowe's. Well, Lowe's, they provide wood. They provide all the essential things that Sleep in Heavenly Peace needs and uses to build beds. Can you imagine if we also provided books and teddy bears and washing machines and these other things that isn't the wheelhouse of some of these big sponsors? So it's harder for these big partners to get behind something that's so broad.
So there's excellence in that, and just knowing your craft, a craft that you didn't know previously, you've developed for yourself, you've developed for your family, and you've developed for scale. Mm-hmm. And so, Luke, you've brought people an ecosystem, and they don't have to be the founder. They have to decide to take that tiny moment that you spoke about before. For them, the tiny moment is maybe hearing that, hey, there's going to be a bed build in town. Do you want to go? Yeah. And that leads them on their life journey. And so this is going to meet everybody where it meets them. You had the opportunity and challenge to start this. And obviously there are hundreds of thousands of people who are thankful for you taking that first step and getting off the couch, literally and figuratively. Luke, tell us, how can people learn more?
Thanks for asking. Yes. So our website, shpbeds.org, if you go there, it's kind of unique. You won't go to some main web page of an organization. We wanted to set this up. It's going to take you to the closest chapter. And the reason why we did that is because we want people to understand, we're a big national organization, but it only matters at the chapter level. It only matters at the local level. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where people get involved. Their passions are behind helping their neighbors, right? And that's the feel and the understanding, the focus we want people to know Sleep in Heavenly Peace is about. So when you go to shpbeds.org, it's going to come up to the local chapter. You're going to find how many kids are on their waiting list. You're going to find their efforts and what they're doing. You're going to find ways to contact them. If you want to be involved and help out, trust me, they would love to have your help. You can be a core team member and show up and help out at builds and help delivery and do all this stuff. There's a great thing. You can donate your money. 10% is all we take from a donation to run this whole thing. 90% of your donated dollar goes to the chapter. You get a pick. So if you live in California and you want to help someone in Miami, you can donate dollars to the Miami chapter, and 90% greater, actually, than 90% of your dollar goes to the kids in that community. All the beds stay in that community. They don't move. We don't transform because we want the community to be involved. We want the community to solve this for themselves. This wasn't going to be ever was going to be solved by some farm kid from Idaho. I knew that a long time ago. What I knew is if I wanted to really make big change, if SHP and if there was this many kids in my own hometown, I knew it was everywhere else, that we needed to create a platform that normal Joes like me can start or be a part of in their own hometown and help kids there. And if you bring up shpbeds.org and there's not a local chapter or one close by, and this is something that really strikes a chord with you, that you really want to be involved with, then you can start a chapter. We've made the boundary to entry very simple, right? So people can go to our website, click on Start a Chapter. You'll hear a webinar, and then you'll be asked to fill out an application. If you still want to do it, then you'll actually be asked to attend a live webinar where you can ask all the questions you want. And even after all of that, if you're still wanting to continue, it's still a passion, then we'll fly you out to Salt Lake City, Utah for a weekend. We teach you everything you need to know. And by the time you get back, you're an active chapter. And we have chapters that have started hitting the ground running. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, we had chapter present training. We train about once a quarter. We had a chapter that had raised $40,000 before they even started to be a chapter.
Wow.
That's how easy it is to raise money. That's how, and I tell people, listen, share my story, that's fine. But the most important story that you can share with your donors and your volunteers is your story. Tell them why you're involved. Tell them why, what you saw when you did a delivery, or how you felt when you built that bed for that child. Right? Those are the things that people resonate with. Avi, he told me about when he went on this build and how he felt. And I know Avi, he's a good dude. He's a normal Joe like me. And I think it really personalizes the efforts, and it allows other people to realize that, you know what, you can make a difference too.
It's amazing. There's no question. It's think local and be global, because but it's going to be the people and the stories and the people that you know in your community who are going to be most affected by you. Luke, the only one kind of thing that I feel like I got to push back on a little bit is the kid from Idaho, the farm kid from Idaho, as though that's some sort of a second rate or a handicap.
Yeah.
I would argue the opposite, because the scale of this thing is such that the need has been there obviously for a long time, but it took that farm kid from Idaho with the grit and the entrepreneurialism and the caring enough to hear the tiny moment to actually get off the couch and do something about it. And I guess really that spark is what set it all in motion. So it had to be a farm kid from Idaho. It wasn't just incidental. So I'm really glad that you, Luke, are a farm kid from Idaho. And I think that that's part of your MO and something that everyone has a lot to learn from. But again, it sounds to me like after this episode, more and more people are going to be connecting with you. And I'm really excited about that, not only for you, not only for the organization, but for all of the people who are going to benefit, primarily the people who are going to roll up their sleeves and get involved. So Thank you so much. This is an outstanding example of really what it means to be, you are what you give. Luke, thank you so much for giving of yourself to the community and to this program as well.
Thank you for having me on.
Before we close, I want to thank Luke for showing us what happens when generosity gets specific. Luke didn't try to end poverty. He built a bed. And that brings us to this week's Giving Challenge. Build a bed. Not necessarily with wooden screws, but with action. This week, identify one real, tangible need in your world. One need, one person, one situation, and then take action. Make the call, deliver the meal, write the check, fix what's broken. Don't brainstorm about it. Don't post about it. Don't plan it for another day. Build the bed, because movements don't scale because they're broad, they scale because they're focused. Thank you to Victoria Hurst for making these conversations at You Are What You Give possible. And thank you for being part of this community. We'll see you next time.